but don't let this aberration deter you from thinking about going forward for advancement. You can take the opportunity to include a statement in your promotion package about how the pandemic has affected you and your progress. But don't look at it and say, well, gee, I didn't do as well this year as I've been doing, so maybe I should wait a year. I encourage you not to think that way. Conversations with your department chair is always really important. I've had this same conversation earlier today with the chairs, and they understand this as well. I guess one caveat would be that if you were working on some things, some improvements prior to COVID, and you were looking for the the second half of 2020, perhaps the 2020-2021 academic year to really show progress and to make progress in some things that have been challenging for you. Unless you were truly able to do that in this constrained environment, maybe that is a reason to wait a year so that you'll have the full opportunity to show how you've improved. Again, my advice to you is to have this open conversation with your department chair. They can guide you and really point you in the right direction. So again, that's really the extent that I would like to, comments that I'd like to make. I look forward to listening to the conversation here and participating as need be. And Sriram, thanks to you for putting this workshop on.
Thank you very much, Sam. And as Dean Easterling said, if there are questions that you have as the workshop goes on, please feel free to ask them. And again, a reminder: use the Q&A, and then at the end, we should have enough time to open it up for some verbal discussion as well. So Heather, could you go to the next slide, please? So thank you to those of you who responded to the RSVP and some of this pre-workshop survey, kind of looking at what the makeup of the attendees are. So I just wanted to share some of that. We have a good mix of the term faculty as well as the tenure track faculty and department leadership represented. You can see we have representation from the teaching track, from the research track, again, through the RSVP from department chairs as well as tenure track faculty. As we know, the process may involve faculty from all streams. We also asked a question of how soon do you think you're going to be putting together your materials for advancement? And there's a good smattering of responses here in the lower graph, ranging from this next year, which could be this coming up spring, in the near future, and some folks kind of looking at this as an opportunity to learn more as they navigate through the process for a future submission, right? So we do have a good spectrum of folks in terms of their preparation to go up for advancement. Next slide, please. We had also asked typically, what are some of the things that you'd like to hear in this workshop? Typically, we get questions ranging in kind of 3 categories. And so we ask that, what are the criteria and expectations? Certainly, there's a lot of interest to know that. And this workshop is an opportunity to answer questions, provide additional guidance, any feedback that you have on specific situations, and perhaps have an opportunity to talk about mentoring. I think that is a topic that increasingly we may want to focus on. If you feel free in the Q&A as well, share if you do have formal mentoring in place or not. And if there is a gap there for the term faculty, I think that's something as a college we can address. And finally, the third topic we get is, what goes into the dossier preparation and what is the process? So I think we'll definitely hit those points. In addition, I think folks had asked, what are some best practices for preparation, submittal of materials, and we will address that as well. And again, one response said, can we just go over the expectations and how they relate to the way tenured faculty might be evaluated. So I hopefully will cover the information that I present will help answer these questions. But certainly, I invite you to ask questions as needed. Hopefully this is geared towards being helpful for you. So if you didn't hear something that answered a question you have, feel free to ask, and we'll do our best to answer. Right. Next slide. So just as a quick reset, with the new changes in the faculty handbook and the governance documents, I just wanted to provide a quick a reminder of what the term faculty titles are. We're now in our second year of this, and for many of you, maybe this has already become part and parcel of what we do. But just as a reset, so we do have kind of four tracks, if you will. We have a teaching track, this teaching faculty. There's a research track, research faculty. Then there's a professor of practice, and then there is adjunct faculty. And so in these categories, you kind of see the titles here. For the teaching faculty, we have a lecturer, which is meant to be to address short-term needs that the department has. And then you have a formal progression track that goes from assistant teaching professor to associate to teaching professor. There is the lecturer appointment doesn't automatically get advanced into the assistant teaching professor. There's a time period. If you've been a lecturer for a certain amount of time, I think it's 3 contiguous years, that appointment transitions to an assistant teaching professor, but there is no advancement path from lecturer to assistant teaching professor. So I just wanted to clarify that, and certainly if there are some questions there, we can help address that. But once you're an assistant teaching professor, then you can advance to associate and then to teaching. Similarly, on the research faculty, there's research assistant, research associate, and research professor. And adjunct faculty, again, there's adjunct, assistant, associate, and professor. Now, for professor of practice, you may be aware that in the College of Engineering, our caucus heavily advocated that we don't have advancement tracks in this particular category. And our college views this position as a way to get somebody who has extensive experience in professional practice. And they may have accomplished great things that they then want to translate back into the classroom. And so our college just has the professor of practice rank. And so that is a standalone thing, and departments, and there's criteria, and there's general criteria in the college governance document, and then the departments have some additional criteria of what it means to be a professor of practice. So the idea is that you hire somebody into that rank. So just to clarify, once you hit one of these tracks, you stay in that track. There was some confusion last year, or some lack of clarity regarding whether if you're in a teaching track or research track, you can then advance across to, say, a professor of practice or something else. And the processes do not allow that. So, for example, if you are an associate teaching professor, you will then get advanced to teaching professor. You will not advance, or you do not have the opportunity to advance, say, to a research associate professor, research professor, or to a professor of practice. So you kind of stay within these tracks, if you will, right? So I just want to clarify that, and then again, I'm happy to answer any questions as they come up later. Next slide, please. So the faculty handbook has some criteria, but I think most of it points to colleges ensuring that the criteria for advancement is clear. And so what I have here is an excerpt of the criteria for term faculty in our college governance document. The pertinent section is there. So the bottom line is the criteria for advancement for term faculty shall be based on the record of success in executing the areas of responsibility defined in your PRS, right? So ultimately, there's as far as the college is concerned, you want to show excellence in meeting the responsibilities as listed in your PRS. Now, I should clarify that your departments then have, your department may have some additional language with respect to advancement criteria. So you should definitely check what the expectations in your department are. But in general, they are aligned with the expectations related to excellence in meeting the responsibilities of the PRS. Now, credit for experience at other institutions should be determined at time of initial appointment. And there is a time limit for the term faculty that the governance document states regarding credit for any accomplishments prior to coming to Iowa State, right? So this is kind of in general what the advancement criteria are. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you look at a little bit more of the details, I'm picking teaching and research here because those are the most common cases that we have seen. I do have another slide for the adjunct, which I think if it doesn't show up here, we can certainly revisit that if there are adjunct faculty in the audience that would like to know more about that. But in essence, the two main categories are teaching and research faculty. So in the case of teaching faculty, there is a kind of a time period that you are in your rank. So which is a minimum of 5 years or its academic equivalent. Remember, it's worded this way because you may come with some prior experience from somewhere that you may want to count towards this particular time. So once you have served a minimum of 5 years in your rank, then you can be considered for advancement upon successful completion of a review, right? So you, as the dean mentioned, you have a constant conversation with your department chair, and kind of hopefully on an annual review basis, you are having that conversation saying, okay, I am planning, this is the year that I would like to go up. What are the expectations? How are things going? So that should be a constant annual conversation in your department, right? As I mentioned, check expectations. We talked about general college governance documents, expectations, but again, you should check what is specified in your departmental governance. And so, yeah, this review at the very least minimum can take place during the 5th year of your appointment, because you would have, by the time you go up and everything, you would have completed that 5-year requirement. Now, I did want to mention some. So I want to make it clear that there are two separate things here. Your review for advancement is a separate process compared to your appointment and reappointment, right? So if you go up for advancement, that process is simply evaluating whether you the department will recommend you to go on to the next rank. So hopefully that happens, and then you get appointed in the new rank. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't mean that you can't continue at the current rank. So that reappointment decision is a separate action, and it is not tied to the success or lack of success in the advancement case. So I just wanted to clarify that. Again, the questions you can ping me. So I see there are some questions coming in Q&A. So let me just finish this slide, and then I'll take a quick look there to see the questions I can answer. Research faculty. So research faculty member may be proposed for advancement to the next rank. Unlike the teaching thing, there is no time period here. But however, the criteria is kind of scholarship expectation with the standards specified by the department. And in general, those standards are commensurate, if not a little bit higher than the scholarship requirement that there is for a tenure track faculty member, right? So again, this is one of those examples where, because the department specifies that standard with respect to scholarship, it is vital that you check what the expectation in your particular department governance says, okay? So at this point, let me just take a quick look at the Q&A. For it becomes, so now we have changed to 5. I'm wondering whether it's 2, those extra. Okay, so the question was related to the time spent in the rank of lecturer, right? So if you have just gone up for advancement, then you are the time that you have to, that 5 years now you would need to spend in your current new rank before you're able to go up. Yeah, previously I think it was 7 years, because you had only lecturer, senior lecturer. Now you have the 3 ranks. And so the idea is that in each of those cases, at each rank, you'd have to spend 5 years. Now, there was a little bit, when this transition to the term faculty happened, so if you recall, I said as a lecturer, those are meant to be up to a year's worth of appointment. So the lecturer position kind of morphed a little bit during this transition. It was not meant for a multi-year appointment anymore, like it was in the previous days. It is meant for short-term needs for a year or less. And then the idea was that if you have served at least 3 years as short-term, you've been hired in short-term again and again, after 3 years, you would then, if the department wanted to hire you again as a lecturer, they would have to hire you as an assistant teaching professor, because you've already spent 3 years as a lecturer. Now, there was at that point when this transition happened, I think in discussion with the provost's office, the clocks were reset, right? So in addition, it was a question of how do we count your time as a lecturer, and I think the decision was made that we're going to reset those clocks. There is some change coming. Faculty Senate is having some debate on maybe that wasn't the intent, etc. And so we're waiting to see how that shakes out from the Faculty Senate, and how that will impact the faculty handbook. And if that changes, then our governance documents will change as well. So hopefully that answered that particular question. And if not, I'm happy to take it up again in a bit here, right? Okay. Right. So I'm not sure if there are adjunct faculty in the audience, but I did have a slide which I kind of had hidden, so to speak, in PowerPoint. But for adjunct faculty, the process basically and the criteria are very similar to that of a tenure track faculty member. Because if you remember the adjunct process, the adjunct rank is kind of primarily we use it for situations where we're trying to get somebody in, but not at the tenure track level. But the expectations are they track the expectations for a tenure track faculty more or less. So again, that's something you want to look at your departmental governance. And if something there is not clear, or if you still have questions, certainly you can contact me at any time and we can have that conversation, right? So I just want to mention that with respect to the adjunct faculty. Okay, so ultimately, when you're preparing, so the way the process works is you have to prepare a dossier. The dossier essentially for term faculty has two critical components, and it's the vita and the faculty portfolio. So these are two documents that are critical to your dossier. You can find all the templates on the web link below, on the web link shown here. It's in our college site, and don't worry, we will share these slides, we'll post it up and make sure that you have these with you, so don't feel the need to furiously scribble down things, but you will see these documents there. One thing I want to point out is it is critical, essential, and a requirement that you do use these templates. If you don't use these templates, it becomes difficult for the review process to actually do what they need to do, because these templates, and we'll go over these in a minute, they are designed to, especially the portfolio. The portfolio document is the one that will use to articulate your case of meeting the expectations for advancement. They are designed to track with the expectations set forth, right? So, so you should use them, and advice, if you're preparing a dossier to go up next year, you're going to put everything into this particular format. For those of you who might still have a couple of years, I highly recommend you don't wait till then. You start putting your materials in these two formats, and then you can update them as needed on a yearly basis. So that's the advice, because as you'll see later, last year we had one particular case where they did not use the template, and so it was difficult to kind of look at the information that we were looking for, right? So it is important that you use the template. So Heather, at this point, if you can put up the Vita document, and the Vita document is a fairly standard document that's used for all our faculty that go up for advancement. I'm going to very briefly go over this. You can look at it in your own time, and if you have any questions, you can kind of ping me. Now, so Heather, if you can just scroll. So we start with the background, professional experience. It's standard information here. Then the scholarship and creative activities. Now, we understand that for many of you, if you are in a certain track, you may not be engaged in a high level of scholarship, or you may have had scholarship at a time, prior to taking this, whatever it may be. Just put down what you have. Just because you don't have that much by virtue of your position in one of these categories doesn't mean it's a negative. It's just a format. We made the call to have basically a standard, consistent Vita format for all our faculty. So that's all that is. So just fill in the information as applicable to you, and don't worry about if something is from, I used to think this way when I was filling something. Oh, they're asking a section here. I don't have much to put in here. Is that good or bad? And I can tell you it's certainly not bad. Because in the case of term faculty, we understand that not all these categories are an expectation for you by virtue of your position, right? So there's a section for scholarship and research creative activities, which many of you might be engaged in, so fill that in. And then there will be, so there are some subsections there, and I'll let you look at that. And of course, if you have that research expectation, there's grant information that's asked. And then the next section is teaching and student mentoring, right? So again, if you're in a teaching track, this area might have increased emphasis. And so there'll be instruction at ISU. And so Heather, if you could pause here for a second. So one thing that we got feedback from, there is so So there's a table here, right, in terms of the teaching, and I think even in the portfolio. So for those of you who are on a teaching track, that table might become quite large, right? So if that table is impinging upon the page limit for the portfolio, which we'll go over in a minute, don't worry about it. I think we're not going to ding you for that. We understand that the table might be longer than, say, for the tenure track faculty member for your teaching contributions, and we completely understand that. So don't sweat it, right? Okay, so there's an example on the courses, and then there's curricular development activity. Heather, if you could scroll down just a little bit slowly. And of course, for folks doing research, or even in other situations, you may be supervising students. And so we want to put down that information for graduate as well as undergraduate as you go down. So keep on going. Yeah, so there is independent study and undergraduate research, and then there's non-IAC instruction. So this is a fairly self-explanatory document. And if there are other things that you have done, there's a section where you can talk about other contributions. So we have a scholarship research section, a teaching student mentoring section, and then there's an institutional service and professional service section, right? So that's kind of the standard trifecta of expectations that most faculty have. And so this document essentially tracks that. So you put down all this information here. And in each case, you can always add in other activities and just talk about that. So that's no problem at all. So the Vita, again, is a fairly self-explanatory document. And typically, we've not had too many questions on the Vita, but I'm happy to take any questions you might have regarding the Vita document. So again, like I said, because the college level review is looking at multiple cases, we do ask that you use this template. I know might be a bit of a chore to transfer it from any other format you might have, but again, our ask is that hopefully you put this and then you can keep on updating it on a yearly basis. And for those of you who are going up pretty soon here, yeah, it might be a one-off effort, but it does really help with the review process that we're seeing everything in kind of a consistent format. Okay. Okay. So the other critical document is your faculty portfolio document. So if you look at this is the actual portfolio document you'll get from our website. Now, if you look here at the list, as it says, this is for the college and departmental staff to be aware of, but I provided this so you kind of know what goes into the dossier, right? So there's a university cover sheet, don't worry about that. There's a PRS. Everybody's, like we said, the criteria is based on their accomplishments or the expectations in the PRS, so the PRS will be there. Then your CV, right? So you'll use your college template. You will work on that. And then D is the narrative of accomplishments. That's the portfolio document we're going to be talking about right now. And then the department will do an evaluation, and we'll talk about the process in a minute. They may be doing peer teaching evaluations. There may be a department committee that's evaluating you and making a recommendation on advancement. So all that goes in there. And then for the research professor track, there are external review letters required. For the teaching track, they are not. So the dossier that comes to the college will include all this. What you, as the candidate going through advancement, are primarily going to be working on is C&D, which is the Vita, the template that we just went over, and what we'll be going over now, which is your narrative of accomplishments, or what we refer to as a portfolio document. Okay, so so there is I tried to put language here that helps you understand what this document is intended for. So it is, if you look at that second paragraph, it is an articulation of your accomplishments and which is placed in the context of your field, your discipline, the expectations for your PRS. So it's like a lawyer building a case. You're going to use this document to say, look, these are the things I've done. This is the impact I have had, and this is how I am demonstrating excellence in my areas of the PRS. So that's essentially what this document is for, and you have to tell your story, right? I don't want to forget this later. I will say it now. I may say it again later as well. Do not leave blanks in your story whatsoever, right? So because if you leave blanks in your story, somebody else will fill in the blanks, and they may fill it in incorrectly, right? So in other words, you don't want the review committee to be making assumptions on something. it is better to just present all narrate your story. And so, for example, oftentimes there might be a question, okay, why did why it looks like in these couple of courses, the performance was not as good as in the others. I'm just making this up, right? So if there are things like that, you should address that head on, talk about what you've done to address it, and just leave no blanks or assumptions for the review committee to look at, right? Nobody's perfect. Each one of us has areas of strengths and areas where we are continuing to improve upon. So it's better to just straight your case as completely as possible. So I just wanted to mention this here before I hopefully I don't forget, and I might repeat it later. So that's essentially what this document is for. You're going to narrate your story in the context of the expectations of your PRS. So the rest of it, so this particular document has a 10-page limit. Again, there's going to be a section where you'll have to provide a table of your teaching. And for those of you who've been in rank for say, the 5-year requirement, that table can be long, especially in the teaching track. We recognize that. And like I said, last time they said, look, that puts a pressure on this 10-page limit. If it exceeds it because of the table, no problem. You do your best to keep it at 10 pages. If it exceeds, you're not getting dinged. This is not like a strict proposal where we just throw it away because it exceeds it, right? So this is our target. We're recommending that you keep it to 10 pages because we want you to have your narration be as concise and to the point as possible. Okay. So this recommendation of how you distribute those sections is just there as a guide. So the way this narrative of accomplishments is set up is the first section is just a synopsis. You want to give an overall integrative summary of the things that you have done and the impact of your activities. And as always, you want to tell your entire story, but please focus on your activities and accomplishments since the last advancement, right? So that's important to do. So if you've gone from assistant to associate and now you're going from associate to full, you want to focus on that time period more than you obviously want to talk about the great things you did before, but focus it or weight it more towards the activities since the last advancement. Then, if you remember, the criteria is effectiveness in the areas of responsibility. That's section 2. So again, first is assessments of accomplishments and impact of teaching and student mentoring. Right, a lot of you might have expectations in this particular area. So remember, in each of these sections, it says here, if your PRS does not include responsibilities in this area, all you have to do is say, my PRS does not have responsibilities in this area, and you just move on, right? Don't feel the need to just fill in stuff if you don't have expectations in this area. So there's a self-assessment of your accomplishments and impact of teaching, and you can see the gray box. Talk about your accomplishments and impact. Is there any scholarship of teaching and learning? Have you worked on textbooks, scholarships, innovative teaching methods, pedagogical changes, curricular development, and anything that is reflective of your excellence in terms of being invited to share your work amongst peers and things like that, right? And of course, in efforts to create an inclusive learning environment. I think that's been an increased focus, and we would love to hear the work that you have been doing and the impact that you've been having in that area. So that's kind of this section. Then section 2 is where you have this table that I was referring to earlier. You provide instructor and course ratings. And then you will see here at the last column, we have something called an appropriate departmental comparison, right? So oftentimes departments will use a department average. This year, what the college is going to try to work is by spring, try to get information on 100 level courses, 200 level courses, 300 level courses on what the instructor effectiveness number might be. We recognize it's not a perfect way to gauge, and it's not the only way to gauge instructor effectiveness, but it is something that's being used currently. So we might be trying to get that for the college. But in the absence of that, or till that is available, an appropriate departmental comparison is good enough. So this could be a departmental average, or within your department, if you have something that has a little bit more refinement, maybe you're teaching a 100-level course and they have information on 100-level courses, that's fine too, because we know that can make a difference, right? The ratings for a 100-level course can be significantly different from, say, a 500-level course. So that's there that we'd like to see a little bit of that. So as I said before, this table has been known to get long. And like I said, the feedback, which we agree with, if this impinges upon your 10-page limit, don't sweat it, right? So it's fine. Okay, and then section 3 is if your department do peer evaluations of teaching, you don't have to insert the report of the peer evaluation here. All you have to do is maybe give a summary saying, yes, we did the peer evaluations conducted, and these are the things that I am going to be working on. So just a concise summary here is sufficient. Remember, in the dossier, your department will include that report of your peer teaching evaluation coming up. Okay, so that's what this section is for. And that's essentially what this gray box here takes, right? So just talk about what you did in response to any evaluation that happened, right? And then number 4 is the impact of student advising and mentoring. So if you're engaged in advising students, many of you might be advising a student org, student club. You might be working with students in your particular department in some way. Maybe there's a group of undergraduate TAs, or in some departments, they refer to them as platoons that you've been working with, whatever that might be. If you're doing some student advising and mentoring, talk about it here. So that's teaching and student mentoring. Section B now comes to the research side, which is accomplishments and impact of technical scholarship and research. So just like we talked about teaching, there is an analog here. Talk about self-assessment of your scholarship. And for those of you on the research track, this might be the most impactful area of the dossier of your portfolio document. Highlight those scholarly products, materials that best illustrate your excellence in scholarship, right? Again, examples of you being recognized by your peers, being invited to share your work, all that goes here. Now, section 2 is basically you provide a table of up to 10 products and evidence of their impact. In most cases, what faculty will provide is their top 10 cited scholarship articles. Maybe it's a conference paper, maybe it's a journal paper, or it could be something else. Maybe it's a product you've done, and it's been adopted by many companies, etc. But that we're looking for what you feel is your most impactful work here, right? So that's what this particular section is for. Now, number 3, I want to spend a few minutes on. So remember, this says accomplishments and impacts of grants and collaborative activities. Iowa State University strongly encourages collaborative efforts. We want you to collaborate. We want you to be successful. At the same time, what we have found in evaluating dossiers is oftentimes we ask that candidates clearly articulate what your role in the collaborative efforts are, right? So this section is primarily focused on 2 things. One is what have you done to bring in grants to support your research? But the second, very important thing is your role in joint and collaborative efforts, right? So that has to be clarified here. And I can tell you, even in the case of term faculty and even in the case of tenure track faculty, if this is not clear, that's where a committee or a review group will start filling in the blanks, right? So don't give them the opportunity to do that. Be very clear on maybe creating a table, for example, saying, look, here are all my collaborative activities. This is what I brought to that collaboration. This is what my collaborators brought. So some way where it is clear what your role in those collaborative efforts are. So remember, you are very close to your work. People reviewing your work may not. So some things that may be obvious to us because we're so close to the work may not be obvious to somebody who's looking at your portfolio. So take that extra effort to kind of spell out what your role in collaborative efforts are. Okay, so that's just a very recurring piece of feedback that we hear often as we're looking and we see when we're evaluating dossiers. And number 4, just analogous to the teaching table, there's a research table. And for those of you who are in research track, this can be a very exhaustive table. So again, don't worry about the length. Just put that. Again, the emphasis is on work since your last advancement. And so again, don't worry about the length. Just put in the information. So again, I'll go over this later. One of the things for the research track is this information needs to be as accurate as possible. So ask here is make sure that you're very careful in total project amount allocated to your work. Those things are carefully entered and accurately entered because that's information that can easily be tracked elsewhere through research expenditures and things like that. So it's important that be accurate. So in your departmental process, maybe you have a staff support person in your department, somebody you can ask them for help to kind of review this, but just try to, it's important that you make sure it's as accurate as possible. Okay, so that's on the research side. And then the next section here is, again, the trifecta is, teaching, student mentoring, research, scholarship, and then institutional and professional service. So same thing here. You can narrate what you have done in that particular space. If this is an expectation in your PRS, if it is not, simply say, I don't have an expectation in this area, and that's fine, right? So to be clear, for the teaching track, you may be heavily weighted towards the teaching and student mentoring side. For the research track, you may be heavily weighted towards the research and scholarship side, and that's fine. Again, don't feel pressure to fill in every section if it's not part of your responsibilities, right? Okay, so so that's the portfolio document. Let me see. I think in the chat, maybe a question came. How important is the student evaluation component? I don't think it's fair to base a judgment on student evaluation. You're correct. So that's the point I tried to make. So in that particular table, you will see there is that instructor effectiveness number that you'll have to put in, and there is an appropriate departmental comparison. At the outset, I should say there is sentiment across the university on the pros and cons of using this number. I think for most part, we have always advocated never use this as the sole measure of assessment. Like with any best assessment practice, you look at different things, right? You can look at this, you can look at the responses to the other questions, you can look at the student comments. Again, you present the case. There are some courses that are historically challenging for students, and sometimes that is reflected in the ratings, right? So I can tell you, when I used to teach a course, and I'm from mechanical engineering, I used to teach a course in engineering measurements. At that time, it was a super unpopular course with the students. They thought it was an electrical engineering course, and they would always say, why am I doing this? I did not want to do electrical engineering, right? So you had to work with that. Of course, there are some things as a faculty we can do to address that. But sometimes you take the brunt of, say, a class being at 8 a.m. or them not liking the subject or them struggling with that content. That's there. So that's why that narrative that you put in, that's why I said hit things head on. So if you feel that there are courses where the student evaluations are not that great, for whatever be the reason, talk about, what are the circumstances from your perspective? What are the things that you are working on as a faculty member, right? Simply a statement saying, look, this is not a fair way to assess, while it may be a fair statement, may not be sufficient for the process of the review, right? So you want to do your best to talk about what you are doing in the course to address any systemic issues that might be there. So I hope that answers that question. If not, I'm happy to answer more. Are there other questions related to the Vita or portfolio at this point? Okay, so Heather, if you can go on to the next slide. Okay, so just a quick recap of what the process looks like, right? So everything starts in the department. There's a faculty committee. You will prepare your materials, and then the faculty in most departments there's a faculty committee that will review your case, and your department governance will spell out exactly what that looks like, right? Faculty committee will review the case and then make a recommendation to the chair regarding advancement. Then the department chair makes an independent assessment of your advancement case, and they then add their recommendation to the dossier, and then that basically comes to the dean's office, right? So again, so you have your materials, committee will prepare a recommendation, chair prepares a recommendation, all that goes into your dossier, that dossier comes to the dean's office, right? So ultimately, the chair, this is the way every process works. The chair may decide to support or not support the advancement, and then there is a communication that goes from the department chair to the candidate going up for advancement, talking about, okay, yes, we're supporting your case. No, and things like that, right? So so there is a touch point where you will know what the department stance is before it comes to the dean's office. Now, if the department is not supportive of advancement, you can either withdraw or request, no, I understand it's a no, but I want the dean's office to consider this case. You have that choice as a candidate. And Just to be clear, you are withdrawing the case does not have any penalty or anything like that. So if there are legitimate reasons and you agree with them saying, okay, you know what, I gave it a shot, there are things I need to work on, and you want to withdraw, then the dean's office will never see it. There's no ding on your record, nothing like that at all, right? So there is no penalty for this. It's just part of the process. So that's how the process will work. Then when it comes to the dean's office, the dean's office reviews it. And so typically it's the associate deans. We will work to review and inform the dean on our recommendation. And then the dean basically makes a recommendation decision to the provost's office. Again, whatever we decide, there will be a touch point back on that decision back to the faculty member. And again, if the decision is no, candidate may withdraw or the request be considered by the provost. In most cases, the provost has been saying, look, if it's a no, then just hold the line. It's unlikely that things may change at the provost office level. So it's in full transparency. This is the process. But typically, if there is a no at the college level, it's very rare that the provost office would then overturn it, right? So but this is what the process is. Let's see. Yep. So that's fairly now. Depending upon how the governance is, I think we've written in such a way that people who are evaluating these cases can be term faculty in your department and can be tenure track faculty. And again, every committee, the expectations for evaluation are clear. It's in the context of your PRS and anything additional that might be in your departmental governance. So if there is a concern that tenure track faculty might have different expectations, I think that should be allayed, because it's very clear on what basis the dossiers should be evaluated. And hopefully your department chair is confirming that and relaying that to the committee that is going to be making that recommendation. Okay, so that's so that we will remind the department chairs of that as well. And so hopefully that is not a serious concern in your minds. Okay, couple of questions. How important, no, we already answered that. For a term teaching faculty, if you still do research, how would that be weighted? Okay, so the question of weightage, again, we are evaluating every advancement case in the context of your PRS, right? So if you're a teaching track faculty, I'm trying to remember the number, I think it's 75% or at least 75% or 80% of your PRS should be devoted to the teaching mission. I think that's how it's worded, right? So therefore, the predominant level of impact, so that should have the stronger, I don't think weightage is the right term, but the expectation in that realm of obviously is higher. So we want to make sure that that particular aspect of your PRS is not compromised, right? So I don't know if that, hopefully that answers your question. You should certainly talk about the research accomplishments that you have, but remember, you are being evaluated against expectations of your PRS. So as an extreme situation, if you have, I'm just going to pick some random numbers here, 75% teaching, and you have 20% research and 5% service. So yeah, I'm just randomly making this up. Please don't take this as, it's not a particular case. Now, if that's your expectation, clearly you should be talking a lot about the accomplishments and impact in the area of teaching as well, right? So if you don't have it, you're not talking about it at all, and you talk only about the research, which is only 20% of your PRS, then questions may be asked. Again, there are a lot of blanks that need to be filled in. And if you don't address that, somebody else will fill in the blanks and you may not like the answer, right? So therefore, again, I urge you to build your case, talk about all your narrative should address your accomplishments in the context of the expectations that your PRS has, right? That is very important. So hopefully that answers that question. I wanted to share a little bit, since last year was the first time we went through this advancement cycle. So there were 11 cases that came to the college. You can see the breakup here. We had assistant teaching to associate teaching, 3 cases, associate teaching to teaching professor, 6 cases, and associate research professor to research professor, 2 cases. So, and you can see in all the teaching cases, I think all of them were supported by the college and went on. In the case of the research track, we had 2 cases, one was supported, one was not. And so just to give you an idea of the statistics, I will also say last year perhaps was maybe a unique year because it was the first year after our transition. And so there were a lot of people who transitioned into a rank because they want to go through that advancement process, etc. So, but it is, the data is here. You can see the cases that went through. Now, having gone through that process, I just want to reiterate a couple of things which I may have already mentioned, but kind of what we learned. Again, it is vitally important that you do use the Vita and portfolio templates, right? You have to take that seriously. We spend a lot of time in a particular case trying to polish up a Vita and portfolio template, right? It just makes it a little bit difficult when the expectation is there to use something and it's not used, right? It just makes it complicated. So please use those templates. And at any point in time, if you have questions regarding, look, I'm not sure what to fill in here, you have resources in the department, and you're always welcome to contact me at any time. I'm happy to help you with that. But please, using those templates is extremely important. And like I said before, information needs to be consistent and accurate. If it says one thing in your Vita and it says something completely different in your portfolio narrative for the same category, that looks very inconsistent, and frankly, that looks bad, right? So you want to avoid those kind of things, right? And again, when I talked about this collaborative efforts, it is extremely important that you articulate your particular role in collaborative efforts, right? Like I said, we support it. I'm not saying don't do it. We want you to do collaborative efforts, but please talk about what you bring to the table so it's clear what your contribution are, and we're good, right? So that's what, so those are the two main things we kind of learned. And like I said, in your narrative, don't leave blanks, because otherwise we'll have to figure out what does this mean? There's no information about this, and so that becomes not to your advantage, I guess. So address everything as best as you can. Okay, so in general, I think the dossiers were quite excellently prepared, and for having gone through this the first time, I think it's pretty good. And in the cases we did have issues, we've talked about the things that caused some of the issues. So please, hopefully this feedback is helpful for you. Finally, just some important dates. I believe the timeline is the following. Jan 29th is your departmental dossier is due to the Dean's office. Please check within your department. They may have some earlier deadlines for you to submit your CV portfolio so that the committee can do its work and things like that. So this is the deadline that we have. That gives the Dean's office roughly a month to complete its evaluation of the cases. And then send it on to the provost office. And the provost office, their timeline is by May 1st, they basically give a notification. Now, in the case of tenure track faculty, this process goes on. From the provost office, it then goes to the president's office to Board of Regents. But in the case of term faculty, the provost office decision is the final step, right? So around May 1 or so is when they anticipate giving final notification. So this is kind of the time frame for that we have this particular cycle. And Heather, if I got some date wrong, please chime in. But I think this is the timeline that we have for this particular year.
Looks good.
Okay. All right. So I think that's all I had. I think we had the schedule 2:30 to 4. I'm happy to answer any questions. And Heather, if you can help me with the logistics here, are people able to unmute themselves, or they need to chime in so that you unmute them?
Yep, I can unmute them.
Okay. Okay, so I have another question here in the Q&A regarding the teaching table from the previous section. If we teach a large enrollment service course, should we still compare to in-department courses? That's a very good question. So I'm hoping to gather some information on the large enrollment courses, and hopefully you have it in time for your dossier this cycle. If you don't, the best comparison might be the in-department courses. I will try to get the numbers for what we have a group of service courses. I think we have the EM courses, we have MATI 273, Thermo, Engineering 160. We have a small set. It might be possible for me to gather kind of an average for those courses. I will do my best to get that. Okay. Other questions that you want to verbally ask or put in Q&A? As you're thinking about that, Dean Eastling mentioned the impact of COVID. So I want to echo his sentiments. it's been a tough time for everybody, so we appreciate everything that you're doing. In most cases, we started with a certain plan, then, students are either having to isolate, quarantine, and many of the faculty are teaching a course in kind of multiple formats. So we appreciate that additional effort that many of you are doing to serve our students. And we are also cognizant of that stress that it is causing. So you have our thanks. And if there's any questions or concerns, department chairs, dean's office, we're here to help and support. In the context of your advancement, as Dean Easterling said, remember, you are presenting your narrative over a period of time. You are building your case saying, here are all my accomplishments for my period in my current rank. If that's getting impacted, say in the last year because of what's happening in this particular year, I don't think it should necessarily disadvantage you or cause you concern to wait, as the dean mentioned. So it's a conversation you have with your department chair, and you want to talk about the entire story, right? And so that's the basis, and everybody's cognizant of the COVID, of the impact of COVID, and talk about it in your portfolio narrative, and I think that should help address more situations. Now, as he mentioned, there might be situations where you might have been trying to address a concern or something in your courses prior to when COVID hit, and your plan might have been, hey, you know what, during spring 2020 or fall 2020, I was going to do ABC in order to address those concerns. Now, if you were still able to do that and you have a positive thing to say, great. But if you were not able to do that, and then that might be again a conversation with your chair, and that might be a reason why you may want to wait so that you can actually do the things that you were planning to do in the way you had originally planned it before you can put your dossier to it. Okay, so certainly, so that's something you should keep in mind. I have another question here. I don't recall if it showed up in the slide, but is there guidance or requirements for the authors of recommendation letters? So if you're on the teaching track, there are no letters required. If you're on the research track, then external letters are required. Similar to the tenure track cases, typically we'll have to check the number here, but you may be able to suggest some letter writers. Your committee will suggest some letter writers, and then they will pick from both. So I hope that answered your question, because if you're in a teaching track, the teaching track advancement dossier does not require external letters, if that's what you are referring to. Now, typically for the research track, those letter writers ought to be they need to be experts in their area. And typically, in the case of tenure track, we're looking for folks from institutions that are perceived as peer or peer aspirant institutions. But there are cases where you might have a solid expert in your field, but maybe they're in a university that's not a peer plus. As long as you can demonstrate, or in the dossier, demonstrate the reason you picked that person, either the committee or if you're recommending something to your chair, that usually works, right? Is there another question that came? When will you send us those data? So if you're referring to the data regarding the large enrollment courses, etc., we've never done that before as a college, I must admit. So in the dean's office, so I'm going to try to get that. Hopefully we get that in place by December, because with this semester, the things have to play out. And so I'll keep you, I'll probably, that'll be my goal, right? Towards the end of December. And I know that's cutting close to when you prepare your dossier. So I'll do my best. If we don't have it, then for this particular cycle, what you have to rely on is your departmental thing. And we recognize that, again, in that particular example where the question was raised, it is clear in the narrative, you have to be very clear that, look, this is the kind of course I'm teaching. Although I'm providing this data, you may want to make the case that this goes beyond just the department. And I think that information, the reviewers, your committee, the dean's office will be able to see. Okay. Okay. Other questions? Still have half an hour. I must say, I do want to thank Heather and Dave for helping with the logistics for this. We are going to be, we're recording this so that the slides and the Q&A that I'm providing is available, and then we'll send out a link as well. And I know this is that we picked this time based on availability, and many people may not have been able to join. We recognize that. So we do appreciate you that you're here. And again, any questions you have, I'm happy to answer. As folks are signing off, if you need to go, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Please use me and the Dean's Office as a resource. Talk to your chairs, talk to your colleagues. If you have questions, they're able to answer, great. If you still have doubts, feel free to email me, call me, and I'll be happy to answer. So, okay, so question here. So for the COVID semester, we don't need to put any evaluations, correct? Okay, so I think when spring 2020 hit, I think the university provost office, we all talked about, we don't want the evaluations from that semester adversely impacting anybody. So yes, that's true. Spring 2020 will not have an evaluation in place, right? Fall 2020, the College of Engineering has agreed. There's a teaching evaluation going out. There are 6 common questions, and then we are adding the instructor effectiveness question back as a college, and other colleges are doing something similar as well. So you will have data for this semester. Now, as the dean mentioned, and I reiterated, we understand that, as an example, you're doing great, and then this semester things take a downward trend. We understand the context, so definitely talk about it in your narrative. But to answer that question, we will have data this semester for that question, but not for spring 2020. And the argument was, if you've done great things and you have student comments saying that you did great things, talk about it. Because the philosophy was, if it is to the advantage of the faculty member, talk about it. If things went south, because things rapidly transitioned in spring, it's we are not counting that as a negative. We understand the situation. Okay. So I'll hang on for a little bit more time. If you have questions, please feel free to chime in through Q&A or ask them. And if you need to go, thank you again for being here. Good luck with everything. Stay safe and be well. And thank you again for everything that you're doing to support our students. And please do take care of yourselves as well. Thank you.
Very well done, Shriram. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think most folks have signed off. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, there's another thing in the chat. Let me see. FYI, students still complain regarding COVID and the expiration courses. Yes. We sympathize with that. Almost all the time. I don't know who else is here on the chat. Yes, but we hear about the complaints more than the great things that folks are doing. So we recognize that, and we are aware. So again, talk about it in a narrative to your best ability, and rest assured, we are aware of the context for this semester.